Hey guys, welcome to CPM 3. This is your Module 3 review. So that must mean you have a test coming up here soon. So, as you can see on this page, there's not a lot of room. So I'm going to be it's going to be very messy by the time we're done with this. So, sorry about that. You might want to try doing yours on a separate sheet of paper. Number 1 says to multiply. So, to multiply, we're going to use FOIL. Okay, first, outer, inner, last. So my first here is 2x times 3x. So that will be 6x squared. Your outer, so 2 times -1, so that's -2x. Inner, 7 times 3x, which will be a positive 21x. And then your outer, 7 times -1, which will be -7. So, if you FOIL, if you kind of notice over here, you're just taking that 2 and distributing it to both terms. Then you're taking that 7 and distributing it to both terms. You're just double distributing. And if you use FOIL correctly, these middle 2 terms here will be like terms, and so you can combine. So then here, my final answer will be 6x squared. -2 plus 21 is 19, so 19x, and then that -7. So that's my final answer here. Now on number 2, it says simplify. And I cannot stress this enough. You're going to have a problem that says simplify, and it's going to look something like that. And more times than not, because you see these double parentheses, you're just going to go directly into foiling. We foiled on number 1 because it told me to multiply. Okay, FOIL is our method to multiply two binomials. And 2, if you notice, you have parentheses right here together. On this one, in between those parentheses is a subtraction sign. So I'm subtracting on this one. So in order to do that, I'm going to bring over my first one, which is that 2x plus 7. Okay, nothing changes on that. You can think of that as being a 1 out front. If you distribute a 1, nothing changes. But now over here, if you think of that minus as being a -1, now you've got to distribute that -1 to everything. So -1 times 3x is a -3x. And -1 times -1 is a +1. So now we can combine like terms. So I have 2x minus 3x. So that's going to give me either a -1x or just -x. And then 7 plus 1 will be 8. So -x plus 8. Okay, so be careful on your tests because there is one subtraction one, and more times than not, everybody foils on it, and that's not what it's asking for. Now, number 3 is another FOIL one. But before I can FOIL, I've got to expand this out. So this is actually x plus 1 times x plus 1. So now my first was x times x. My outer is x times 1, so either 1x or just plus x. My inner, 1 times x, the same thing. And 1 times 1 is 1. So like before, these middle ones here, you can combine. So my final answer is x squared x plus x is 2x, and then plus 1. Now number 4 says to factor, and number 5 says to solve. These two are very close to each other. You've got x squared plus 2x minus 3, and then x squared plus 2x minus 3 equals 0. When it says to factor, you are going to be left with your two binomials, right? So x plus a number, x minus a number, and then you have a number right here. When it says to solve, because it equals 0, now you need x equals some number and some number. And I know I'm going to have two answers there because that squared tells me I have two answers. So with both of these, you start the same way. You make the x. My a times c is 1 times negative 3. My b term is this middle one, 2. So what adds up to b and multiplies to ac, and that is going to be 3 and negative 1. So 3 times negative 1 gives me negative 3, and 3 plus a negative 1 is that positive 2. So for number 4, when it says to factor, my final answer is x plus 3 and x minus 1. On 5, when it says to actually solve it, you got to take it that step further. So you've got to factor it first. So when you get x plus 3, x minus 1 equals 0, now split it up to get your two answers. So we'll have x plus 3 equals 0, and x minus 1 equals 0. So here we'll subtract the 3 to get x equals negative 3, and then add the 1 to get x equals 1. Okay, and again, I know I'm going to get two answers because of that squared. That quadratic tells me I get 2. Make sure you are factoring when it says to factor and solving when it says to solve. If you tell me on this one that x equals negative 3 and 1, I'm taking off a point because you went a step too far. If on 5 you tell me this is the answer, I'm probably taking off 2 points because you did not solve. Okay, so make sure you're solving when you need to and leaving it in factored form when you don't. 1, read the directions. Factor, solve, and 2, one has an equal sign and one does not. So, I've already talked about this common mistake that you guys will accidentally foil on this one. This one is also a common mistake. This one says to solve, and more times than not, you guys will see this parenthesis next to parenthesis again and start foiling your little hearts away. When it says to solve, you need to do this right here. It's already in factored form, so simply split it up. They've done the hard part for you. So don't foil it back together. That does me no good to solve this problem. So since this is already right here in this factored form, just split it up to get your two answers. So my first one here, I'm trying to decide where to do this. Okay, my first one is 2x plus 7 equals 0. My second answer is going to be 3x minus 1 equals 0. So on this first one, we're going to subtract 7. Okay, and I'm going to run out of room if I keep that there. So we're subtracting 7. So we'll get 2x equals negative 7. And then the last step is to divide. So we get one answer. Can't reduce this. So that equals -7/2. Okay, then on this one, we're going to add our 1 over. So we'll get 3x equals 1. Divide by 3. And again, I can't reduce this, so my second answer is 1/3. Okay, that's another big mistake that's going to happen on that, is that you guys aren't going to solve, you guys are going to FOIL. They've done the hard part for you. It's in factored form, so split it up and give me your 2 answers. Number 7, marked over the instructions a little bit. It says, given the function, right here, A, does this graph go up or down? Well, because my A right here is 1, that means this goes up. Okay, it should open up like so. B, find the vertex and write this as an ordered pair. So, you need to memorize this. This is your -b over 2a. You know what? I can't, instead of it me writing over the words, let me do b down here. Okay, so x equals -b over 2a. So my b is 2. So I've got -2 over 2 times a is 1. So we've got -2 over 2. So my a here, or my x, is -1. So to get my y, we're going to plug in that -1 into both of these x's here. And when we plug this in, we're doing this with parentheses. So I've got -1 squared plus 2 times -1 minus 3. This is calculator work. You're putting that in just like that, and you should end up with -4. So write this as an ordered pair. It is always x, comma y. So my ordered pair here is -1, comma -4. So then C says complete the table with several x values, then graph the parabola by plotting the points on the table and connecting them with a smooth curve. When you get your vertex goes right here in the center. So we've got -1, -4. You need to go 2 up and 2 down, and it does not matter which is which. So I can either go 0, 1, -2, -3, or -2, -3 up here, 0, 1. It does not matter. Now I personally like the way I did it the first time. Okay, so I'm going to go that route. So, just like right here, now to get your y coordinate, you are plugging in these numbers in place of these x's again. Oops. So, I don't know how I want to do this. You're going to do whatever your x is squared, that's for this x here, plus 2 times whatever your x is again, minus 3. So you're doing 1 squared plus 2 times 1 minus 3. You're doing 0 squared plus 2 times 0 minus 3. Negative 2 in parentheses squared times negative 2 times negative 2 minus 3. And negative 3 in parentheses squared plus 2 times negative 3 minus 3. Okay, you're taking these here and plugging them in to both of these x's. So when you do that, for 1 and negative 3, you're going to get 0. And for negative 2 and 0, you're going to get negative 3. You need to have that pattern where it repeats itself, but it's still a good idea to plug everything in to make sure you get that repeating number. So now let's plot. So we've got 1, 0, 0, negative 3, negative 1, negative 4, negative 2, negative 3, and negative 3, 0. So connect this as best as you can with a smooth curve. What we do not want to see is like a sharp V. So around that. Okay, so something like that. All right, turn the page. Now we need to solve the equation. On 8 and 9, these are very similar to each other. The only difference is one's a minus 7 and one's a plus 7. So, on 8, we'll do 8 up here. First thing you want to do is to get that radical by itself. You need to isolate the radical. The radical is not isolated. I want to get this by itself, so I need to move this minus 7. So to move that, we're going to add 7 to both sides. Cancels out here, so I'm going to come up here. This is going to leave me with the square root of x minus 6. 3 plus 7 is 10. Now, the opposite of square root is to square. So here, my square root and square cancel, and I'm left with x minus 6 equals 10 squared is 100. Add your 6 over, and we are left with x equals 106. Now, before I can circle my x equals 106, we have to plug this in and check to make sure we don't have an extraneous solution. So we're plugging this into the original. So I've got the square root of 106 minus 6 minus 7 on the outside equals 3. And I'm trying to determine if that is true. So 106 minus 6 is 100. Square root of 100 is 10. And 10 minus 3 is, or 10 minus 7 is 3. So this is my answer. Now let's try this again on 9. I'm going to try and squeeze 9 in right here. So same thing, you've got to isolate the radical. So this time, because we're adding 7, we're going to subtract 7 over. So I'm going to be left with the square root of x minus 6 equals 3 minus 7 is negative 4. you are going to square both sides. My square root and square cancel, and I am left with x minus 6 again equals negative 4 in parentheses squared. We're doing negative 4 times negative 4 is 16. Now add your 6 over, and we get x equals 22. Now, before I can circle that or box it, you've got to check it in as well, and we're checking it into the original. So I've got the square root of 22 minus 6 plus 7 outside that radical, and I've got to determine, does that equal 3? So 22 minus 6 is 16. Square root of 16 is 4. And 4 plus 7 does not equal 3. So that means that this one here has no solution. Okay, and that's why it's very important that you check. If you do not check, you will not get full credit. So even on 8, when the answer was 106, if you do not check to make sure that it works, you will not get full credit. So make sure you check to get every point you can. Number 10, what is the quadratic formula? This does have to be memorized. So your quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, and it is all over 2a. So on 11, use the quadratic formula to solve. Write your answer as a decimal written to 2 decimal places. So I've already got my formula wrote. This is my A, this is my B, and this is my C. Okay, and please remember that A is with that negative. So we've got x equals negative b, so negative 16, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, all over 2a. So let's simplify. This is going to be negative 16 plus or minus the square root of something all over 2 times negative 16 is negative 32. So in our calculator, we are putting 16 squared minus 4 times a times c in our calculator. No radical, because I have that radical right here. Okay, so put that in your calculator. And we get 13,568. Okay, now this is not a perfect square, I don't think. No. So, split this up. So this is negative 16 plus the square root. And I'm just going to put the square root so I have room to write my answer. Okay, and you can see what the square root is right here. And then we'll do negative 16 minus the square root all over negative 32. So notice two things here. The only thing I am changing the sign of is where this plus or minus is. This negative 16 is negative on both of my two answers. So in your calculator, you're doing negative 16 plus the square root of 13,568. You're hitting enter. You get 100.48 and some stuff. Keep that in your calculator and divide by negative 32. So on this top one, we get negative 3.14, since I'm going to two decimal places. Okay, that's one of my answers. So now let's put this next one in. Negative 16 minus the square root of 13,568. You get negative 132.48 and some other junk. Divide that by negative 32. And you get 4.14. Okay, if you need help putting this in your calculator, you need to let me know. I can't really show you how to do it on this video. All right, on 12, find the following given f of x equals 2x squared plus 4x. On 12, everybody's good with this one here. This is another one that almost everybody misses. Notice the difference between the two. One of them has f of negative 3, and one is f of x equals 0. When you have something in parentheses, this is your x, and everybody's good on this one. So we will do 2 times negative 3 squared plus 4 times negative 3. This is calculator work. You get 6. Okay, then you guys will come over here to B, find the values of x, so I don't know x, for which f of x equals 0. What you guys will do is do the same thing you did here and put 0 in for this x. But these are wrote two very different ways, so they don't mean the same thing. So now that f of x equals 0, we're replacing this f of x with 0. So I've got 0 equals 2x squared plus 4x. So now we're solving a quadratic equation. You can use the quadratic formula, don't recommend it, or we can just factor. When you factor, ask yourself two things first. Is it in standard form? And yes, it is, because x equals 0, which we should have asked yourself that on this one too. Okay, quadratic formula and factoring, you need it in standard form, which means that it equals 0. Then, do you have a GCF? You do. In this one, what can you divide into 2 and 4? It's going to be a 2. And how many x's can you take out if you got an x squared and an x? That is 1. So now divide. 2x squared divided by 2x is x. And 4x divided by 2x is a plus 2. Now quickly check. Distribute it back. 2x times x is 2x squared. 2x times 2x times 2 is 4x. So now, this is in factored form, set both of these equal to 0. So I'm going to have to kind of move over here. So I've got 2x equals 0. You just divide by 2, and my first answer is 0. 0 divided by anything is 0. Then we'll take what's in parentheses, x plus 2, and set that equal to 0. Subtract by 2, and you get x equals -2. So those are your two answers. So that's another one that people miss very often. So study that problem. (13) Write each of the following using radical notation. That should say, then simplify. For part B, round your answer to 2 decimal places. So on A, because this is in parentheses, that means that negative is included. So you keep the top part of that fraction with your number, and then whatever's on the bottom of this fraction comes around and it becomes the index of your radical. There we go. Okay. No, I still don't like that, sorry. Yeah, okay, that's just not going to work. So this means I have the cubic root of -64, and this is all to the second power. So you can either square this -64 first. Okay, now I'm going to take the cubic root of this. So the cubic root of -64 is -4. So I've got in parentheses -4 squared. Okay, and to get that, you guys are hitting 3, second, caret, and then -64. And now -4 squared, -4 times -4 is a +16. B, we have an extra step because we have an exponent with a negative. So we have this rule that says if I have x to the -1 power, okay, let's make that a different power, -2 power, to make this positive, that x squared needs to go down to the denominator, and you put a placeholder of 1 on the top. That's the rule we are following. That was last module. So to make this 1/2 positive, we are putting this 5 to the 1/2 in the denominator. Okay, and remember, when you go from bottom to top, because this is like it's over 1, right? When you take it from the top of that fraction to the bottom, it changes that exponent positive. So the whole point of moving it is to get this positive. And we'll put a placeholder of 1 on the top. So now rewrite this. You've got 1 over, this 2 is your index. So you can put a little 2 here, but do I need that 2? No, because that just means it's the square root. So I'm not even going to put anything. And then we have 5, and likewise, that's to the first power. Do I need that? No. So maybe let me go ahead and just put 1 that's like with the 2 and the 1. And we can just know that that's the same as this 1 over the square root of 5. And then you just put this in your calculator. So you'll hit 1 divided by second x squared, 5. And you get 0.447. That 7 is going to make this become a 0.45, since it says to 2 decimal places. This one isn't as commonly missed as the other ones that we have circled, but you will have one very similar to that one, so you need to know that process on this problem. Okay, now this is technically all of what your review is, but you have more problems on your test that this review doesn't cover. So that is why we need to go to the second part where we have problem 14. So we have 5 more problems on this additional page. 14 says, given the function x squared minus 11x plus 30, find the following. We need to determine the x-intercepts. This was last lesson. When you find the x-intercepts, you are letting y or f of x equals 0. So that means I have 0 equals, I'm actually going to come over here. 0 equals x squared minus 11x plus 30. So you can either factor or use quadratic formula. If you're good with factoring, that's the easiest way. You can use quadratic formula as well, but it's a little bit longer. I'm going to use factoring. So to factor, you go into your x. My a times c is 1 times 30. My b term is negative 11. So what adds up to b and multiplies to ac? That's going to give me negative 5 and negative 6. Negative 5 times negative 6 is a positive 30, and negative 5 plus negative 6 is negative 11. So now I have x minus 5 and x minus 6. So now that it is factored, set both of them equal to 0. X minus 5 equals 0. We're going to add that 5 over to get x equals 5. And then we got x minus 6 equals 0. Add your 6 over, and we've got x equals 6. Now, these would be acceptable answers, except for it says write as ordered pairs. If it says that in the instructions, you have to do that. So my ordered pairs, because it's x equals 5, I'm going to have 5 comma 0. You need that x coordinate to be your 5. And likewise here, this x coordinate needs to be 6. So these are my two x-intercepts. B says determine the y-intercept for the function. Write as an ordered pair as well. Y-intercepts are the easy ones. That's when you let x equal 0. So even though this says f of x, okay, that means the same thing as y. So I've got y equals 0 squared minus 11 times 0 plus 30. I'm putting in a 0 for both of those x's. Well, 0 squared is 0, and anything times 0 is 0. So all I am left with is y equals 30. Again, if it didn't tell me how to write it, this is fine, but because it says write as an ordered pair, now in place of my y coordinate, we're putting in 30 and 0 for my x. So that is my y-intercept. 15, match the function with its graphs. So there's a couple different ways you can do this. The easiest way is actually to find this y-intercept. But if you notice, we have y is negative 3, y is negative 3, y is positive 3, y is positive 3. So these have the same y and these have the same y. So I can't really use that method on this one. So the second easiest thing to do is to find the vertex. And we can see that these vertexes are all in different places. So to find your vertex, you will use x equals negative b over 2a. So my b is 2, so I got negative 2 over 2 times my a is 1. So this is negative 2 over 2. So my x equals negative 1. That's actually all the information I need. We can plug this in to get the y. But if you can see here, your x is 2, your x is negative 2, this x is 1, and this x is negative 1. So which one has that correct vertex here at x is negative 1 is D. Now if you plug this in, right, if we do y equals negative 1 squared plus 2 times negative 1 minus 3, I'm plugging in that negative 1 to both of these x's, you're going to get y is negative 4, okay, which is exactly where this is. This is negative 1, negative 4. But you don't even really need to do this because this is the only one that's at negative 1. Okay. Last page. A person is standing close to the edge of the top of a 170-foot building, throws a baseball. The height h of a ball after t seconds is given by that function. What is the height of the ball after 2 seconds? So, because my t represents seconds, and now they're telling me 2 seconds here, my t equals 2. So take that equation and plug in a 2. So you've got h equals negative 16 times 2 squared, right? That's my t. Plus 96 times 2, right there. Plus 250. Okay, taking that equation, plugging in 2 for t. So let's plug that in our calculators. This is calculator work. And we get 378 feet. Now, B isn't as easy. When will the ball strike the ground? We've done this for 2 lessons now. Hopefully by now, when you see strike the ground, that means your H is 0. So I've got 0 equals negative 16t squared plus 96t plus 250. Because this says round to the nearest tenth, I know this isn't factorable. So we're going to use quadratic formula. My A is negative 16, my B is 96, and my C is 250. My quadratic formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So I've got negative b, my b is 96, so negative 96 plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. So this is going to be negative 96. I'm going to go ahead and go down here. It's going to be negative 96 plus or minus the square root of some big number all over 2 times negative 16 is negative 32. So I am putting what's under the radical in my calculator, not including that radical. So we're doing 96 squared minus 4 times negative 16 times times 250. And we're going to get 25,216. If you square root that, that's not a perfect square. So we'll split this up into our two answers. So this is negative 96 plus the square root of 25,216 all over negative 32. And negative 96 minus the square root of 25,216 all over negative 32. Notice this negative 96 is negative in both answers. The only thing you are changing the sign of is where this plus or minus is. When you put this in the calculator, you're doing the top first, hitting enter, and then dividing by that negative 32. So we get negative 96 plus the square root of 96 plus the square root of 25,216, hit enter. You're going to get 62.79 and some other junk. Divide that by negative 32. And we get negative 1.9, well, if we're rounding to the nearest tenth, it's 1.96. This 6 makes this 9 go up, which makes this go up. So this is actually going to be about negative 2 seconds. Well, I can't really have a negative number for seconds, so we're tossing that one out. So hopefully this one here is a positive. So negative 96 minus the square root of 25,216. You get negative 254.79 and some other stuff. Divide that by negative 32. And the same thing's going to happen. It's 7.96. This 6 makes that 9 go up, which makes that 7 go up. So this is about 8 seconds. (17). This is a missed question, and it should not be. It literally tells you to solve the linear equation. This means you have one answer. Solving linear equations and quadratics are different. On this one, when you solve, first we've got to distribute. So we get 2x plus 4 equals negative 2x, negative 2x minus 7. The goal here is to get your x on one side and your variable on the other side. I don't want this to be 0 equals. It's not a quadratic equation. You don't have a squared term. So, get your x on one side. So we're going to add this 2x over. I'm left with 4x plus 4 equals negative 7. No. I'm sorry, guys. That should be an 8, shouldn't it? Right here, 2 times 4 is 8. That's my bad. Okay. We're still going to add this over. So I've got 4x plus 8 equals now just a negative 7x. So I've got my variable on one side. That means I need my constant to the other side. So we're going to subtract this 8 over. So I've got 4x equals negative 15. My last step is to get x by itself. So we've got x equals negative 15 over 4. Okay, it's a linear equation, and so that's why we have only one answer. Methods between quadratics and linear are opposite. You want to get your x on one side, your number on the other. With your quadratic, you want it to equal 0. Okay, so different things. And then lastly here, I would say this is another commonly missed question. You're factoring out the GCF. This is distributing backwards. We're undistributing. So look at your number here. What can I divide into 16 and 20? And that's going to be a 4. If you don't see that right off the bat, you can do that little upside down birthday cake. I know I can divide in a 2. So 16 divided by 2 is 8. 20 divided by 2 is 10. I can still divide in a 2. 8 divided by 2 is 4. 10 divided by 2 is 5. Those are now prime. So take these and multiply them back together to get to this 4 here. Then look at your z's. What's the lowest exponent okay, and that's that z to the 4th. Okay, so that's my GCF. I'm going to move this over a little bit. Oh, man. Okay, no, I'm not. Okay, so once you find the GCF, now what we are doing is taking each of these terms and dividing by that GCF. So 16 divided by 4 is 4, which we have right here. Z to the 5th over Z to the 4th is just Z, right? 5 minus 4 is 1. 20 divided by 4 is a positive 5, which is right here. And Z to the 4th and Z to the 4th cancel, and so we're only left with that plus 5. So if you notice, if you distribute back, you get to the original, so that's how you know that we did this correctly. All right. I don't want to discourage you guys, but this is a hard test. So please pay attention to those numbers that I have circled: 17, 18, 6 and 2. Okay, those are some commonly missed questions. Anything that you're struggling with, maybe rewatch that a couple times. Oh, and also 12B. Don't forget 12B here. Okay. You have one retake, so don't stress out about this test too much. But please study for this test. Okay, it is hard. It is challenging. There's a lot in it. As always, rewind this video. Let me know if you have any questions. I wish you guys the best of luck on this test.